With a few days playtime on the new Pickable Passive system, I wanted to make a review video as well as talk about what Blizzard might be able to do with a more advanced version of this, because Alec Dawson did tease out that they're thinking about skill trees into competitive Overwatch. First, a brief overview over the entire concept and how it's played out in its somewhat simplistic form here, each role having 3 distinct passives. We'll review the specific ones that we did get, but a cool thing about this that we might consider is that from different seasons or every few months, they might switch some of these up or use them as alternate balance tuning knobs. The sky's kind of the limit with this thing. Some of them clearly overpowered, some of them way too overpowered in the right situation. The balance kind of goes all over the place, but a big benefit from the casual fun factor of it is it at least gives you something to explore that's uniform from player to player, at least in that given role. The ones we got so far, I didn't necessarily feel were more effective at counteracting any pick's weakness, but more like elaborating and extending the strength they already had. So that, I think, is a bit problematic and makes the game even harsher in its counterpick design, which Blizzard seems to really be in love with this idea. Keep in mind, I've been a critic of the free pick counter swap format since the launch of the game. And if they like to do this kind of idea that sort of doubles down on what a hero can already do to like remove a weakness, to let them lean into their strength, I think it's more likely that the top meta picks are going to be more oppressive with the more you can stack onto them, which was definitely the case in 6v6 in Overwatch 1 when the game had more complexity and it was much harder to break the top tier meta synergies. In the same way, you give a superpower to a hero that's supposed to have a weakness and kind of remove that weakness or overemphasize the strength, you just get overkill power creep on top of power creep, stacking times infinity. That being said, it was fun to experiment with. And they're looking for feedback with this, so let's try to put on our thinking cap to actually say something constructive, so this can eventually be the most interesting system it could be. Okay, a few more general points. I think role passives should be removed, and instead, maybe they have individual hero role passives that you can change. The reason is, the first one we're going to talk about, Unyielding, where the debuff duration on any debuffs goes down by 40%, was so severe that I think this one was easily the best tank passive if the enemy had any debuffs at all. And while on one hand, I think we all feel it would be like just or fair if certain characters could pick this, ones that are way too easy to beat with minor debuffs or stacking them, like maybe say Wrecking Ball. There's lots of other heroes that also benefit from it that maybe don't need it, like Roadhog, who just shakes off an anti-nade in whatever, a second and a half, and has a built-in sustain effect to make him more durable and heal afterwards. So if a passive like this exists in the game, certain characters like Ana would just be unpickable, at least for the express purpose of countering a tank. The entire way that we conceptualize the balance of the game would have to be rethought with these passives in place. That being said, though, I do like how unpunishing, I guess, it was to play some of my favorite characters. I could pick a passive and kind of walk brazenly at things that used to hard counter me, and they'd have to think a little bit harder how to engage with me. I'm not sure if that's fair, though. And I think what would be better is if there was more clear trade-offs to that exchange, as well as more personality, because again, some tanks are like giga broken with anti-debuffs. Other tanks maybe don't need it as much because they have anti-debuffs built into them, like Zarya, for example. Then also when we look at the other passives, we have to start to think about ones that have upfront value versus high upside value. And that's the dichotomy between the armored passive and Last Stand. Armored will give you 100 health converted into armor, which of course is the new Giga Armor in the most recent patch, minus 10 per damage instance. That's insane. So all of a sudden now you could potentially, as a character that never had armor before, be very resistant up against spread damage or rapid fire damage. And if you didn't need Unyielding, the one that reduces debuffs, then that one was like the clear favorite to me, in my opinion, because it creates more space as you're pressuring in. Immediate sustain and health is typically always better because it's automatic. You don't have to do extra steps to get value down the line. Metas would have to slow down to have like a big upside meta, which could happen in the right scenarios, but generally things that just roll and win up front will be picked until there's a reason to have a bigger upside by playing more passively or to control and wait out the game. I'm kind of using Magic the Gathering or Hearthstone terms here. I'm a big fan of thinking of it that way. Like if you can win faster or choose to win slower, the upside for winning slower has to be like auto win for you to choose it over winning now as opposed to later? Like, what's the benefit of the delayed gratification? Well, in this instance with Last Stand, 50% cooldown reduction when you're below 50% HP. There's a few characters that have big cooldowns that you think would get extra value from this. So a character like Winston maybe goes in, gets injured, tries to hold in his bubble, and there's like a small benefit to leaving the tank character at half health so they get their cooldown faster. Some min-maxing going on there, sort of like standing in a Curie ult, but that's a bit counterintuitive, I think. But it's a lot of extra steps, in my opinion. Another one that I think looks like a good idea on paper, Zarya takes a lot of damage, gets in that same exact scenario. Extra bubbles protects her or her team and gives her more damage so she can clutch back fights later. But if you choose something that gives you an advantage early in the fight and the enemy is using something that gains value later in the fight, you will just win if you have man advantage already. So their late fight upside would have to somehow beat out yours. And the other ones are so automatic, like 40% on debuffs or 100 armor health. Like, why would you want to do all the extra steps just to get your cooldowns a little faster later in a fight you're probably already losing due to not having upfront value? See where I'm going with that? All of those are like cute ideas. Again, we're looking at like a COD perk system. It's undercooked in its current version, but cool ideas. It just takes like half a day to figure this stuff out, I think. And I'd be a lot more excited about this if we decoupled all of the role-wide passives, took all of these ideas and maybe like a whole bunch more and spread them out per each individual tank hero. So each one of them could have their own personality. That's kind of complex and we're getting pretty MOBA at that point. But I think that's the only way you can balance this kind of thing because there's certain ones I think certain tanks just shouldn't have. Like, I don't mind Unyielding going on to Reinhardt, but I think it's super lame on Roadhog because it just lets Roadhog play like Reinhardt. At the launch of Overwatch 2, the devs kind of tried to homogenize things for it to make sense to the widespread player base. And I don't think anybody really wants that. There's nothing you can do to make the game make sense to players that aren't invested heavily in it. So just make it play better for those that are. That's what I think. Now let's look at the damage passives. These are super easy because they're so bad and obvious, the only ones that do anything. Slayer, see critical health enemies through walls. Why would you ever need this in such a brawly game? Not even Sombra would pick this again over the other ones. And I think a problem with the pickable DPS passives is that their base passive is so strong, they probably couldn't make any of these any interesting. Trigger Happy instead was the one that I used almost all of the time. Even if it only gave me one extra shot, it was better off than some of these other ones because a lot of characters need that upfront value again. Because remember, with extra ammo, you're applying more damage and more DPS passive, which is actually like the real passive out of all of these three, plus the fourth one everyone has. Frenzy, eliminations grant 30% speed boost. This one I think is really fun, but just too weak in comparison to the rest. It's only really dominant on a few picks like Genji and Reaper. Worth trying, but again, it's like a win more type mechanic. And situational. Support is where things got a little bit more interesting, but even this, after enough practice, I think I have strong opinions on which one is pretty clearly the best. Resourceful, reduce cooldowns by 20%. This one looks really alluring to me because support abilities are so strong, but the problem is the next one, Swift Save, which increases healing by 50% for targets below 35%, is so uniformly strong that it applies to more things more often. Like, there's a lot of cooldowns in the game that also heal your teammate anyway, and just by the support design, well, yes, a lot of them deal damage a lot, but really a key thing you can do as a support is save your teammate's life with clutch healing. And between the cooldowns doing that job on their own, as well as the self-healing passive to go around, your teammate hides around a corner, they're probably safe anyway. A lot of what you want to do as a support in Overwatch 2 is clutch heal. So Swift Save sort of boosts your base healing output, or maybe your healing cooldowns to be much more clutch. And I think that outweighs having your cooldowns more often. I think Resourceful would be better if there was more supports with offensive cooldowns. The character that's probably the best for Resourceful would be Ana, because her cooldowns are long and are such a big percentage of her kit, but she's still pretty much balanced in wanting to heal and duel. So having clutch heal and natural stats to save teammates' lives, I think is more likely going to be better most of the time. But it's an interesting thought for them to maybe gear towards more of an offensive mindset with some of these pickable passives for support. I just don't know if they exist right now, or if they'd be bold enough to lean in that direction. Then the last one is Close Call, where you gain a brief 20% speed boost when below 50% HP. This would be a cute idea if they already didn't make support the most durable tanky class in the game. So many of them have ways to get away, or self-escapes, or self-buttons, or I can't die buttons, or whatever. They've already got ways to survive. So often they're in safe positions anyway, so you would have to like be fighting enough to need this passive and not your natural survivability. Meanwhile, the other supports are just keeping their teammates alive with extra stats. So again, this one is a pretty clear loser in my opinion. Overall, okay, those are all 9 passives that we had to look at. The sad thing about it is I just think it's like super easy to solve without much effort. The decisions weren't as interesting as I'd like them to be. And I think it's about time that the devs respond to the feedback that's been loud and clear in this community. And I'm optimistic that this kind of system can actually lean in and amp up the more individualistic minded approach they're trying to take with this game that allows you to be a team player or more of a solo player, as opposed to Overwatch 1, where it was overly crammed to force you to learn team play or just get wrecked. I would like to see some passives that exist as ways of backup options that can help you resist from feeling the need to swap. I think Unyielding is a good start, but there's some other good ideas that have floated around, like in the experimental cards, for example. Like Diva could take less damage from beams while matrixing. While on one hand, the Overwatch 1 devs were really concerned with clarity, and they are now too. That was one of the things they wanted us to comment on. Like, is the game clear when there's all this stuff happening behind the scenes? And I think ultimately, like, for those that know the characters, it's kind of obvious what's happening. And there's enough chaos anyway that none of us, I don't think, are like perfectly in sync with all of the numbers. We do an action, and for all we know, that target gets healed from across the map, and we're like, oh, it takes 2 to 3 more actions than I thought it was going to. That's not like a surprising thing in this game. In other games, maybe yes. Like you count 1, 2, 3, that target should be dead. In this game, I don't know, it's crazy all over the place. An ult pops off, line of sight, that surprises you. Like, no one's got perfect view of the chaos of Overwatch anyway. So I think instead they should have clarity in realizing what kind of passive your enemies are using against you. Like, I kind of didn't like in the kill cam, I wasn't sure what they had. Whereas in Call of Duty in the kill cams, you get to see their entire perk loadout. I think that would help. I think also like a grounding philosophy of what these pickable passives are aiming to do. I'm not sure that's entirely clear either. Like, one that I'm not a huge fan of is having passives that just amp up the amount of healing in the game. Not a huge fan of that. Like when teams had bad targeting against the swift save passive, and then the tank also has either more armor, extra cooldowns, or anti-debuff, all of those just made tanks more tanky in this mode. Keep in mind, they were just buffed as well in the overall game. So it's like damage we're losing in multiple areas at the same time. To go then on top of that, add more healing stats as well, either more cooldowns or healing boost effects. I don't want that really, but as a player, and I think this point of view doesn't really get advocated for a lot, but support players like to save their team from death. It feels great. It's overpowered, but it feels good. If tanks like to run things over, supports like to save their team, or at least like the support-minded playstyle. And when I play support, I feel that. I love playing BAP, seeing a teammate critical and then hit my shift, which I know deals extra healing, and then it will do even more with the passive, and then before I know it, everything's healed super giga mega. That feels impressive. But what the devs would have to do is then balance the game with these passives in mind. And the problem that had with the complexity of Overwatch 1, MOBA Team Comp Builder-a-thon, where the synergies were uber oppressive in Overwatch 1. Now we look back fondly like, oh wow, that was so great that we couldn't get countered, but the meta strategies were dominant and couldn't be countered. That was the complaint at the time. And when you add more complexity like this, they have to be really careful not to allow synergies of a certain passive with a certain character to just outstat everything else. And the potential for that, I thought, was super obvious with this test. It makes the game more MOBA-y, which I think a lot of players want, but you do that, and then the synergies are OP. And then the downside, what will happen with that is the same thing happened in Overwatch 1, then the characters have to be downscaled with their base power to account for their win rate potential when they're in the ideal circumstance. This sort of forces them to gut the fun out of some characters for some players, but thankfully, this is a choice you get to make, as opposed to that synergy being a teammate picking another hero in a synergy that makes your hero too good. That helps it out a bit, I think, because at least you're the one who's choosing it or not choosing it. And the devs could get win rate stats on that with you making your own choices yourself. So that's optimistic. Another criticism I have is like most of this is just baseline stats. It's like stuff that they could tweak in a patch, right? Or we could do in a custom game. It's not really gameplay interactions. It's not extra decisions. It's not more real complexity. It's just numbers tweaks. The downside of that, kind of boring, and is just splitting the character's power up in a way. But the upside is, it's kind of an interesting way. You still feel like you're investing in the character like the way you want to. Because even if I say, well, there's a clear objective answer to this of these 3 or 5 or whatever, however many options there are, you might want to try something else. And you at least have the option to do that on your character, and it adds for some variance on them. And there will be some games where the matchup you get kind of creates another option to be objectively better as well. So more variety, I think, is where this game needs to go. I think that's the best thing that this game could try to do, is figure out ways to get us to be able to invest in the characters that we like, as opposed to feeling that we have to play other characters that we don't want to be playing. The more of that, the better, I think, which is kind of my overall philosophy of Overwatch 2. A lot of players get trapped into the ranked grind, and ranked has always been punishingly annoying in this game, always been obnoxious for the highest tier of play in both Overwatch 1 and 2. You play this game too much at any level of play and it starts to feel like a job. And I think it's better to look for casual things to enjoy with a good percentage of your playtime, maybe even like half. Because then you can start to realize like how fun the mechanics are, as opposed to needing to go down a flow chart of meta decision making just to try to win at all costs. Like Overwatch doesn't play that well under those circumstances. It's not as clean and pristine of a competitive game as some others. It's got blemishes. It's got pain points. It always will. So I think a casual route like this is probably good for the game. But let me know what you think in the comment section down below. What was your take on the Pickable Passives Quickplay Hacked? And would you like to see expanded into a bigger skill tree system with either more options or hero-specific options? Let me know in the comment section down below. I have been reviewing your guys' gameplay as well. At the moment, I think we're collecting tank VODs mostly, but before the patch changes and wipes the replays, I'll try to look at anything you guys send me. But for sure, there's going to be one or several fairly in-depth tank guide videos back at the quality that we made years ago. It's going very well, but it's going to take a little time to put the blood, sweat, and tears it takes to make these kinds of things. So please be patient with me. You can send in more replays linked in the description to the Google form sheet. And remember to add your battle tag so I know who I'm reviewing. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.